want to kind of maybe ask like certain scenarios on how they get started. Like, do I just say, I want to start, and then I reach out to people? What is usually I guess like that starting point? Is it usually a project brief that comes around? Maybe it's a public sort of use case.
So, okay, got it. So the question that you're asking is that in what circumstances do we kind of, kickstart a consortium?
Correct.
Now,
Yes.
and what is the driver? So very often you see consortia are formed for, typical, I'm giving you typical, in large industries, infrastructure projects, consortia are very common because they tend to be multi-billion-dollar, multi-million-dollar projects. And they've got different stakeholders who are specialized in different things, and the customer is looking for one single point of contact for, dealing, or looking for a complete turnkey solution. The second is that, very often in research organizations, very often you have consortia, because then they are looking at a project based certain outcome and looking at certain complementary skills and certain framework, because the organization which is funding it may invite a RFP or RFT or something like that, and that may require that you have certain consortia. And just to give you an example, that if I'm looking at, you see, based in Australia, and I am looking at, doing something, let's say a research project in Singapore. Now, I have a couple of options that I can, like I said, I can open my own office, I can operate from here, I can have maybe a potential joint venture or something like that. But at the end of the day, the Singapore entity which is funding the research project will want to deal with somebody based in Singapore. And they may require skills X, Y, Z, or certain kind of requirements which I am unable to meet myself, which means that I have to form a consortia, and I can take many different routes to do that. That's another one. The third is very often for grants. When it comes to grants, typically the requirement, there will be a selection criteria for the grant, and for meeting the selection criteria, it may be worthwhile to form a consortium. Now, here again, it is very important to look at, what are the models of a consortium. A consortia can be, in one way where one of the partners can become a prime. By prime means they become the single point of contact insofar as the customer is concerned, and everybody else becomes, like a subcontractor to them. Now, another model can be where one partner is not prime, but they're just the representative of the entity vis-a-vis the customer. The third model can be where, there is somebody from outside, the group of people who are forming the consortia, they are front-ending it. And of course, there is a, agreement with them, with the consortia. Now, the fourth element is that, you can have a different structure altogether. You can have a different vehicle altogether. You can form a new entity, which is really the entity which is going to bid for it. Now, all of these have pros and cons, and depending on the size of the project, depending on the nature of the project, you will have your selection criteria. Also, when you go into all of this, you also have to look at a gated approach in terms of a profile of an activity or a project, because the initial phase can be of a feasibility study, which can be followed on to scoping, which can go on to design, development, implementation, and each of these stages you can have go no go decisions. Now, it is possible that you may have one structure at one particular phase, and you have another structure at another particular phase, depending on what are the resource requirements. Who's pulling in what? Because is it a capital resource? Is it a skills resource? Is it some hardware which is required? So all of these factors will come into play into looking at first of all that what structure, and of course that should we have this consortia for a particular project, or for ongoing activity, or for multiple projects. So all of these factors will come into play.
Wow, that's a lot to factor in and to make these decisions. Let's say you've already had, maybe there's a grant application that you want to go for. Let's say you know what capabilities you have, and you've identified different gaps. What would be, I guess, the best process for securing another like partner to come into the consortium? What are those best practices on finding people to work with?
So this is a very good question, because you see, I see this happening all the time. And what happens is that, there is the end date, for submitting a grant application. And, there are gaps in my application. Oh man, who's the first person that I know? Then I quickly talk to him and get together some agreement and, get on with it. But I think that is the single most step for which is going to take you to a failure, because you got to remember that an agreement is as good as an agreement, as the trust between the consortia partners.
Mm-hmm.
So, the paramount is that, you see, because very often, let's say hypothetically that, we have to, there are gaps in submitting an application for a grant. Now, first question is that, is it in the same geographical location or is it international? Let's say that I'm based in Australia and then I have to submit a grant in Singapore. Now, when it comes to that kind of a situation, then my first focus has to be looking at what is the key selection criteria from the customer. They will very often, you see, because a Singapore government, like all governments all over the world, or for that matter, whether it's Australian government, will essentially provide funding for entities which are incorporated and based in Singapore.
Yeah.
They are not there to, fund activities by Tom, Dick, and Harry all over the world. So what that means is that I need, first of all, to have some kind of an agreement with somebody located in Singapore. Now, you see, in Middle East, you see, once upon a time, that used to be the only way that you could do business, is that the local partner had the way, it was the front end and you had to be the back end for the local company. Nowadays, things are much different. But the reality is that just imagine that you don't want to get stuck in a situation where the front end, kind of does whatever they want to do. And you are there fumbling and wondering, how do I go about it? So that's where I mentioned the element of trust. Now, the question is that if I have, that is one I say is maybe a mandatory requirement. So you can look at the selection criteria and look at what are the mandatory requirements and what are what I call as, flexible requirements from a selection process. The other is that if I need, let's say that I have skills in XR, and this requires maybe some knowledge of IoTs, maybe requires some knowledge of 5G. I have some knowledge, but I'm not an expert in those areas. Therefore, essentially, I need to get partners into a consortia to get this together. Now, should I go for a consortia? Should I go for a partnership agreement? Now, remember that consortia essentially is also an expensive game, because there is some money involved in, finding your agreements and all this, and you're operating in another country. So those are some of the decision points. But how would I go about finding? So the question number one is that, yes, I find the three things which come straight to my mind. One is that, okay, I need somebody who's going to be my representative, for the customer located in Singapore. Second is that I need somebody who's got IoT skills. Third is I need somebody who's got, say, 5G skills. Now, do I get these people from Australia, or do I, source them locally?
Yeah.
And herein comes the question in terms of what is my strength of relationship with any of these people, that I'm dealing with. How am I able to really establish? So my recommendation is that, you see, in broadly, we should be having a strategic outlook and be on the lookout and have working relationships, with a range of people where you can judge in terms of what is the trust factor, what is the commonality of the value proposition and the objective. So I may want the grant very, this is the only objective in life. Whereas my partner, for him, it is just one of the 100 different things that he is doing. So will I be able to get the share of that activity? See, finding a range of people in the skill category is not difficult at all. But it is the question of the selection of the right, mix, which is going to descend ultimately, because it is a journey. And down the road, equations may not change. So therefore, if there is a working relationship, that and the trust factor, that will go a long way. And how do you? And end of the day, you have to align with whatever the selection criteria of the grant or the funder is.
All right. Well, Pradeep, thank you so much. I trusted that you would bring the goods, and you did. That was such an informative and actionable session, and your talk was truly amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Casey. I always enjoy fireside chats with you, whether they are on a platform like this or otherwise. So,
Yeah.
once again, this is Pradeep from Sydney signing off, and have a good morning tea, afternoon lunch, evening glass of wine, or whatever it is in your part of the day. And bye for now.
Excellent. All right. And everybody, we are going to be taking what is it? An hour and a half break. So if you want to mix and mingle in the social lounge or jump in a table and chat with anybody, please do so. Otherwise, we'll see you back here in 91 minutes. Take care, everybody.
Bye.